Press the bell icon on YouTube and don't miss another update.
See, government started initially with a very negative note. You talked about black money, then you started with NPAs, and then you disqualified 14 banks from lending. They came under PCA, and you wanted growth. Then we had a demonetization where MSME suffered and the growth suffered. With all these, how did you expect the growth to go up and the employment to go up?
Okay, so let's see how things were in 2014-15. In the previous 5 years, growth had gone up and down. It had been quite spiky, but if you take the average, it was 6.7 or something like that. Not a bad growth rate, incidentally.
That's the new calculation or the old calculation?
This is the new calculation, which is now on which everything is calculated, so it's like to like. But 6.7, by the way, given that it was immediately after the global financial crisis, so it was okay, it was spiky and so on. That was not the real problem. The real problem was that things had completely gone out of control. You had inflation spiking up well into double digits for the previous several years. You had fiscal deficits going up to, now you crib about, oh my God, it didn't hit 3.3, it was 3.5 or whatever. Hello, it was 6.6 in 2009 or 10. You had you had current account deficits going well into 3.5% of GDP. You had massive lending happening from banks completely out of control.
Was fiscal deficit really 6%?
Yes, check it. 2009-10 was 6.6% of GDP. Combined with states, it was 9.5% of GDP.
States I don't know, but
I'm saying combined by states.
Sounds
so it was, the system was completely out of control, quite apart from the fact that there were all these scandals and so on. So the most important thing that you had to do
but 9-10 might have been a consequence of the stimulus that came with
yes,
the downturn.
But remember then, if you, either you say the growth, but it came with all these things, and the lending, for example, which by the way started in 2006 before the crisis, and there were years of 30% plus bank loan growth. All of which, I had to clean up. I've myself been involved in cleaning it up. So the first thing you had to do was, as I said, maximum governance. The first thing you had to do was impose order. So what did you do? You introduced what was going to be painful, but had to be done, a monetary policy framework. And you have reduced inflation from an average of 10.5 to 4 point something. It's about 550 basis point reduction in structural inflation. Anywhere you did it, it would be painful, but it had to be done. And I would argue that we have now structurally brought it down such that we can now do all kinds of things with it. For example, lower cost of capital. I mean, you can't expect to be a competitive country in a world where your chief competitor, say China, can lend to its corporates at 6-7%, and we are lending at 12-13%. How do you lower it? You have to first bring down inflation. Is that a painful thing to do? Yes. Secondly,
but now that it's been done, do you see rates coming down now?
Yes, and I have been arguing this, as you may have, many have read. I am a big advocate of radical reductions in interest rates.
One thing you can't accuse Sanjeev of is keeping things to himself. He speaks his mind.
Yes, and I have making this case for at least a year and a half that our interest rates, real interest rates in the country are absurdly high. I am glad they finally begun to reduce them in a structured way. We don't want to suddenly do it such that we again lose control. It has to be done in a structured way. I'm sure the Reserve Bank and the MPC will do it in a responsible way. But we have to take the advantage of the fact that we have lowered inflation and lower the cost of capital, because there are many spin-offs from it. I mean, quite apart from the fact that it makes it cheaper for government, etc., to borrow. Remember, the biggest borrower in the system is the government. Since we are talking about the fiscal deficit, let me tell you, the primary deficit of the central government is only 0.2% of GDP. In other words, excluding interest payments, the government is essentially running a balanced budget. So what is the problem? The problem is we have this accumulation of huge amount of high interest debt. So as we bring down the cost of capital, the fiscal deficit itself will come off. That creates, by the way, even more space for reduction in interest rates and so on. So you get into a virtuous cycle. So why is everybody so unhappy that we did all the painful things? You're still around. We are still the fastest growing economy in the world despite all of this. And we did it together. Many people grumbled, but we did it. We are here. You did it, by the way, ladies and gentlemen. and to have taken a moment in history when people were going to take it. By the way, this is a country where for most trivial of reasons we have people rioting on the streets, at least doing a dharna. We did all these painful things. Most of it, at least you will agree, were necessary things. And people grumbled, but they took it. Now to have wasted this moment in history and not done it, you will agree would have been criminal.